welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever. It's Thursday, May 22nd, and we are deeply honored and privileged to have with us today Vijay Singh, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Vermont Public. He's been holding down that role since October of last year. And Mr. Singh, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Vermont Public was created, as many of you know, in 2021 when Vermont Public Radio and Vermont PBS merged into one unified public media organization, and has been an important part of the Vermont news media landscape ever since. Mr. Singh, I first wanted to ask you about where things stand and have you bring us up to speed on what the current situation is around this whole business of the funding cutbacks that have been much in the news lately for numerous organizations that the federal government in Washington is seeking to curtail funding on. And one of them, of course, is for the Corporation for National Broadcasting and National Public Radio and PBS. I guess I just wondered, on May 1st, the president signed the executive order that aimed to slash public subsidies to PBS and NPR. He alleged there was bias in their reporting. That was the basis for the cutting back the funding. And I guess wondered, has that taken effect, or is that still a work in progress, or where do we stand?
So I would say there's a lot of uncertainty. While the executive order was delivered or signed, I should say, there is a lot of disagreement on how effective it will be. Most folks from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS, NPR, and even external parties agree that it does not seem like the president really has that authority. And so let me back up to explain CPB, or the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So this is a third-party nonprofit that was created as a part of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Act in 1967. And the idea of CPB is to take funds appropriated by Congress and then disperse them to the public media system across the country. It is 2 years forward funded in order to actually reduce the amount of political interference. It's also set up as a third party with no control by the executive or even the legislative branch other than the amount of funding that goes towards it, so that there is distance between the politics and the content, especially the news content. So that's sort of the general intent. And what the executive order that was signed does is it prevents any CPB funding. So this is the federal money that eventually ends up with local stations like Vermont Public, from being able to send that money to PBS and NPR. And the way we do that is we essentially license their content. So we are member stations. And when you turn on the television, when you turn on the radio and hear on the radio, it might be Morning Edition or All Things Considered and lots of other types of content, we are paying NPR for that content, for the ability to broadcast that to everyone in Vermont. And the executive order says local stations cannot send that money to NPR or PBS. So we would not be able to take the NPR content and broadcast it on our air in the way we currently do it. Because we wouldn't be able to buy it. We would not be able to send that money to NPR and PBS. The executive order also prevents CPB money from going directly to NPR and PBS. But there's a very small amount. The majority of CPB money goes to local stations to support our infrastructure and our programming and our ability to license the national content.
So there hasn't been a check that you were expecting them to get in the mail that didn't come so far?
Not yet. So the money in question to start, so again, 2 years forward funded, there is the future beyond. So what has already been appropriated is FY26. So our fiscal year runs from July 1 through June 30 of the next year. And so FY26 is coming up. And so FY26 and FY27 have already been appropriated by Congress. If the executive order is not effective, then we should get that money. We get two disbursements. We get the first chunk of it in the fall, and then the second chunk in the spring. But again, there's a lot of uncertainty. So while our current funding is not affected, our future budgets are very much affected. And so while there are a lot of legal minds who believe that the executive order is not going to be effective, there are a lot of other things that the administration is trying to do to prevent money from going to NPR and PBS. So another approach that the White House announced that they would deliver, although they have not done it yet, is a rescission package. And so rescission would be delivered to Congress by the White House to say, those funds that have already been appropriated for FY26 and FY27, we want to take those back. Do not deliver those to, do not send it from the Treasury to CPB. And so they announced that they would do this, although they have not done it yet. If they deliver this package, then Congress has 45 congressional days to debate on it and either approve the rescission, reject it, or do nothing. If they reject it or do nothing, then we get our money for FY26 and FY27. If they approve it, then we lose that funding. But again, lots of uncertainty around that. Now, that's what has already been appropriated. In the proposed budget by the White House, the money for CPB long-term over the next 10 years has been zeroed out. So while there, the best thing I can say again is there is a lot of uncertainty from CPB, NPR, PBS, local stations. We're doing all we can to get certainty as soon as we can. But there is just a lot of uncertainty right now.
Uncertainty is a word I'm hearing an awful lot from many different sources. I guess I just was wondering, when the Trump administration, attempted to cut funding for like universities or also put pressure on some law firms, some of those institutions, caved is probably a little too strong, but some sought the challenge. Others kind of tried to find a pathway to avoid having too much funding cut. Has there been any discussion among your colleagues and the other folks at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting about what the strategy ought to be if worst comes to worst? Is the idea we should challenge this, or do we kind of find a pathway to kind of maybe work through this period of uncertainty?
I think across the board there is a agreement to challenge this with whatever means we have available to us. What we are beholden to, what we will never give up, is our independence. Again, the system was very smartly designed to try and reduce as much of the influence as possible, and just because a lot of our funding comes from the federal government does not mean that we are going to change our approach and our content. We certainly will not, in fact, change our approach to what we air, how we approach our stories, our journalistic integrity, and so on. So I think the first line of defense is actually getting as many constituents to tell their elected officials how valuable public media is. And in fact, we are seeing this. When all of these things have been thrown out by the federal government, public media overall, again, all the entities started a campaign or joined a campaign called Protect My Public Media. And this is a place where people can go and easily find their elected official, send them an email, send them a letter, give them a phone call to explain how valuable public media is to their lives. And millions of messages have been sent. And from what we hear, elected officials are responding to that. So, before we get into the weeds, and we will certainly over the next few years, because the approach from the current administration in terms of the attacks on public media, I don't think they're going to stop. But the American people find public media incredibly valuable, and so we're focused on that. We want to continue to deliver that value. And as best we can, it's great when folks, again, tell their elected officials how valuable that is. So I think that's the first thing we're considering now. Where there are legal cases, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, NPR, and PBS, I think they will go to court. But I am not privy to those conversations. They're in the courts. An example of this would be One of the other things that the administration has tried to do is to fire some CPB board members. So there are 5 board members right now. 3 of them appointed under the Biden administration got an email that said, you're terminated. And CPB responded and said, you have no authority to do this. And that is currently in the courts. So again, I'm not necessarily privy to the strategy there, other than, again, by any means necessary, we're going to try and fight all of these challenges towards our independence and our funding.
All right. So far, it hasn't affected your ability to put on programming or do business as usual as you've been doing for the last 4 years or so.
Not yet. But if we were to lose our funding for Vermont Public, that's about 10% of our operational budget. That is not insignificant, and our service and our ability to deliver what we deliver today would certainly be affected. But it's even more complicated, and it's more painful. It would be far more painful than that actual dollar amount, because there is a network. We are a federated system. Vermont Public is one station among many hundreds across the country that are tied into this system. So from NPR and PBS, we not only get content that we air and give people access to, but we also get technology and resources and negotiating power for music, things like music rights. And so if federal funding were to go away, while it's 10% for Vermont Public, and we're going to figure out whatever we can to continue all services as best as we can, there are other stations in the country that rely on about 40, maybe even up to 50% of their operating budget from CPB funds. They would very likely go out of business the next day. And if they go out of business, there's an implosion effect on the network that would be detrimental, not only to, I mean, it's would be incredibly unfortunate to all the folks in those markets that rely on those stations, but it also has effect on us here in Vermont. Because if those stations go out of business, then it becomes harder for NPR and PBS to sustain themselves with, let's estimate it at 25% fewer stations who are able to license their content and so on. So then our fees in Vermont go up, and their ability to give us technology and music rights and so on goes down. It just, the unknowns and the ripple effect of the federal funding goes away, again, is much larger than the 10% that we get. So while it doesn't affect us yet, and again, we're doing all we can to keep things on the path that we have been used to for the past few years and decades, in fact, we have to make some contingency plans if things go away, because again, this would be really, really detrimental to the network overall, and therefore our ability to deliver service in Vermont.
Because I know, I'm assuming then that not from 90% or thereabouts of your funding comes from donations and other sources, but even though people might be more inclined to, let's say, bump a $25 donation to $50, that by itself probably wouldn't be enough to offset the 10% federal funding that you'd be losing.
It might be for a while. In Vermont, folks are already very generous. Like you said, where 10% of our funding comes from the federal government, the other 90% comes from, the majority comes from individuals and local businesses who are, again, just very generous. We are able to deliver all of the other things that we do aside from our NPR and PBS content, mostly from this generosity. And so, yes, of course, if the federal funding goes away, we're going to ask folks to fill that gap as best as we can. But number one, I want to recognize that we already do that a lot. I know fund drives are not necessarily folks' favorite thing, but they're necessary for us to continue to deliver what we do and to make our services free to anyone who can't afford it. We absolutely rely on that. And so again, we would certainly, by any means necessary, and part of that is going to be asking people to give more. But the idea that, it goes back to the initial idea of how the federal funds came to be in the first place. It's important that as a country, as communities, we do some things together. This is a really public broadcasting in America is a really unique system and a beautiful example of a private-public partnership. So we take the federal money as seed money, and then we go to our community and say, hey, taxpayers have ponied up this amount. If you're able to give us more, then we can deliver all these wonderful services. So, I point all this out to say, in Vermont, again, we already have a lot of members who support what we do. And rather than conceding we're going to lose this money, I'd rather say it's important that as a country we continue to fund public media. And I know that Vermonters will show up and again extend that service, extend that seed money far beyond what the federal government gives us.
I think your point about it being a national service is an important one, because a lot of those stations I think you were referring to a few moments ago probably are in small rural communities or rural states where the alternatives for news sources, trusted, reliable news sources, is pretty skimpy. And I mean, that whole environment has been shrinking steadily anyway over the past 20 or so years. But I would imagine a lot of those stations are in rural areas where that PBS station is really the only real news source.
You're 100% correct. A cut to federal funding will disproportionately negatively impact rural areas and especially low income areas in the country. And in a lot of cases, the local public media station is the only local entity left. So if there are any other options, they're certainly not free, and they are nationally or globally owned. So aside from the news desert that it would create, the local connection would also be lost. And you point out trust, which is really crucial here too. While the criticism on the criticism from included in the executive order was on the biased nature of content, we can dive into that a little bit more. But public media is one of the most trusted institutions and trusted media organizations in the country. About 3/4 of Americans find value in public media. In fact, I think the number is about 65% of people who voted for President Trump in this last election say that public media is either adequately funded or underfunded. So this notion of we should lose our funding because of the type of coverage we have is not founded in the reality, the value that most Americans have in public media.
Hmm. So how does one go about measuring whether or not content is balanced? That's an issue I've struggled with myself many times over the years. I mean, because what's balanced to one person is unbalanced to somebody else. I mean, is there a kind of a metric you use to say, well, this show may have had a bit of a left-wing slant, but we want to balance it off with something else? I mean, is that how the thought process goes, or is it some different than that?
We at Vermont Public anyway, we don't necessarily spend too much time. Of course, this is part of our consideration. We want to be as fair as possible, but we are worried about the truth. We are worried about facts, and sometimes those are going to let's say bolster a particular argument on either side of the spectrum. But we are not here to make an argument for one side of the spectrum or the other. We're not here, in fact, to even change your mind. We're here to open your mind by presenting what the truth is as best as we can see it, as best as we can report it. So I would say fairness in our coverage, making sure that different voices are represented. If we are only interviewing, let's say, liberal voices, then let's make sure we try and find a conservative voice so that we get that perspective too. But again, it's fairness and facts and the journalistic process that guides us versus trying to, let's say, find so-called balance, if that makes sense.
One of the other criticisms I think I read coming from the federal government about why it wouldn't be a big problem to cut the funding to PBS stations and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is that we're now in a whole new era. It's the digital age. We have podcasts, we have YouTube, we have social media as much social media as you could possibly absorb. I'll try and be polite here. Um, and therefore, PBS stations and television stations, well, that's a vestige of a bygone analog era. Do you think that's a fair observation, or my guess is there's plenty of pushback to be had on that? But I mean, when I read that, I kind of went, "Huh? What are you talking about?"
Yeah, absolutely a misrepresentation of the reality. So first of all, we still have plenty of people who rely on our terrestrial broadcast on television and radio. And when we consider the digital age, there are while there are very good nonprofit solutions in Vermont, we're very lucky to have other news entities. While I know journalism has contracted even in Vermont. Vermont is actually a very healthy ecosystem compared to the rest of the country. I'll point out 7 Days and Vermont Digger as two great examples of other journalistic entities that we benefit from. But the idea that there are so many more options now is not the intent of public media. Public media was created to be an alternative to commercial media. Commercial media will always be driven by revenue, advertising dollars, and in the case of social media, attention time. So Facebook, Instagram, any use those as examples. You can insert any social media app or whatever it might be. They really want you to be using their app as much as possible, and therefore they are motivated by clicks so that they can then get ad revenue and so on. We are an alternative to that. So we are here to deliver service to people, again, to get local news and information, national news and information that you can trust. And we have a clear and deliberate firewall from where the money comes from, and the stories we choose to tell, from other media entities, current commercial entities, to social media. No one else is doing that. Again, other nonprofit news organizations perhaps, but on the commercial side, just because there are more options, they're still motivated by these commercial interests. And that's where we are very different, and where there are still very few options. In fact, those options have gone down over time, especially in journalism.
Right. Well, looking ahead, I guess I'm just wondering, and assuming all this financial piece of it works out, uh, what do you see is coming up next for Vermont Public? Are there any plans for the future? There would be kind of big changes, or even small changes, or any thoughts on what the long-term strategy might be for growing Vermont Public?
We absolutely, well. So first of all, let me say I'm less than a year in, and I know how well respected of an institution Vermont Public is in Vermont. So any changes we make, we want to be very careful about it, because we know what public media means, what Vermont Public means to everyone in Vermont. And I certainly, any changes we make, we want to make sure are improvements over time. I'm also cognizant that we can't necessarily make everyone happy, right? If we make a change, it's likely going to disappoint some folks. But if we make those changes, we want to include those folks in the conversation the best we can, and let folks know clearly why we're making those changes. And so I tee that up for or I lay that out to explain that we'll make changes slowly over time. So I don't necessarily expect a big table flip moment where everything is very different. But we want to be deliberate and careful about changes. What we know we have to do is continue to deliver excellence in our broadcast service. So on radio and on television, we want to continue to improve our service there. And what that means, and this is everywhere across the board, but especially on broadcast, more local flavor. This is something that we see in national surveys for public media, but I have heard directly in lots of conversations with community members, and even when I've appeared on our own call-in show, people call in and say, hey, we used to do a lot more sort of funky Vermont flavored stuff. What happened to all of that? And so we want to do that. Now we have limited resources. We have to be careful how we marshal those resources, but we want to be more locally focused. So I think that's something you'll see as a big efforts in the next few years, in addition to continuing to lay the tracks for our digital future. So while, again, we are going to continue to maintain our broadcast excellence, we have to recognize that habits, especially for younger media consumers, are completely digital. There are a lot of folks under the age of 25 who do not have access to a radio, who will never subscribe to cable television. And so we have to, in order to sustain the legacy of Vermont Public and make sure that it's just as we've been here for 50 years and have been delivering excellent service for the past 50 years, we want to do that for the next 50. And to do that, we have to be realistic about the media habits of the younger generation. And so we have to also focus on extending our service in a better way in the digital world. So be more local, improve our service, and lay the tracks for the digital future are the things that are ahead of us.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. And where do you guys get your ideas for developing new programming? I mean, is it just a case of you're all sitting around at a meeting and somebody gets a bright idea, or how does it all work to develop the shows that you put on?
So it's a very collaborative process. I mean, there are some of the meetings of what you described, but that is certainly not the entirety of it. So we do have a content strategy. So we want to make sure that we are able to deliver a reliable service over time, that whenever you come to Vermont Public, you know what to expect. We also take in inputs from national surveys. So PBS and NPR and other entities are constantly looking at the media ecosystem and what public media is best suited to serve. We also talk to our community quite a bit. So, for example, this is not the only place we do this, but we have a community forum. This is a group of folks who volunteer their time, and they tell us about how, they give us feedback on our current service as well as service that they would like. As an organization, we are also trying to build in more and better close feedback loops with our audience so that we have a better sense of what's working and what needs improvement and so on. So all of these different inputs inform how we approach forming a new project that can be a very small project up to an entirely new distribution arm or something like that. But it is a collaboration amongst our staff with our community, as well as lots of data inputs, as many and as best as we can get.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I see also partnerships seem to be a thing too as well. You have a couple of reporters that you partner with VT Digger on. Lexi Krupp, I think we had her on a show here, I think one point last year. I think she's one of your reporters that you share with VT Digger.
Well, we do have partnerships, and we absolutely want to lean into those. Carly is another one of our reporters who is we work with VT Digger on her work is often shared between the two entities, and we absolutely want to lean into that. Again, journalism is under threat in the United States, and we all need to work together. Vermont Public is healthier when our other journalistic institutions in Vermont are also healthy. So from VT Digger to 7 Days to all the local newspapers that are still surviving, we absolutely are always thinking about how can we partner with them to be able to sustain the overall ecosystem.
All right. Well, I guess we're going to have to leave it there for today, Mr. Singh, but thank you again very much for your time and really fascinating conversation at a, shall we say, interesting, or I suppose uncertain moment. That seems to be the watchword of the time. But we wish you well with that, and hopefully this story will have a happy ending. And because the work that you and your colleagues do at Vermont Public is truly outstanding, and I know I watch you all the time. So
I appreciate it very much. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you who've been with us today. Hope you found the show interesting. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.